Hello again. In Britain during the 1950s, 60s and 70s, many people arrived from former colonies like the islands of the Caribbean and countries of the Indian subcontinent, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Families of Indian heritage also came to Britain from Africa, having felt the need to leave countries such as Kenya and Uganda. Those leaving Uganda came to Britain as refugees, having been stripped of all their wealth and belongings. It is impossible to track the origins and progress of all families belonging to various nationalities or ethnic groups, but we are certainly able today to see how well they are doing relative to the average British citizens. According to the Office for National Statistics, or ONS, a department of the United Kingdom's government charged with collecting and publishing data on life in the British Isles, there is a great disparity between how people who come from Indian families are doing, as opposed to black people who come primarily from Africa and the Caribbean. The figures for income between 2016 and 2019 make fascinating reading. The highest incomes, more than £1,000 a week, are earned by 28% of British people. There is a wide variation though between the ethnic groups who make up that average. Two figures are of particular interest. Among those of Indian origin, 46% are earning at this highest rate, while only 20% of black people are doing so. The percentages are reversed the lower down the income scale one moves. Looking at those who earn between £300 and £399 a week, which makes up 11% of the population, we observe that just 6% of Indians fall into this low bracket, set against 15% of black people. We can see too that rates of unemployment for those of Indian origin are half those for black people. The figures for January 2021 show that 8% of black people are out of work, while only 4% of those of Indian heritage were in this position, roughly the same as the percentage of unemployed white people. Once again, it is worth remarking that if racism is really to account for this greatly increased proportion of unemployed black people, then it is a very selective and strange kind of racism, one which affects Africans and Caribbeans but not Indians. What are we to make of such a disparity of income and unemployment? The first thing to remember is that none of these people come from long-established and wealthy British backgrounds. It may well be that the children of an English duke or banking magnate come from families with inherited wealth stretching back to the 18th century, but that's not the case with almost any person in Britain from an Indian or black family. The overwhelming majority came to the country in search of better fortune than they enjoyed in their place of birth. Any differences in income are likely to be rooted in their attitude and behaviour after arriving in their chosen destination. Anybody buying a newspaper at a privately owned shop in England, let's say somewhere that's not a branch of a supermarket or a chain of garages, will have noticed that the odds are that the proprietor is likely to come from a family with its origins in the Indian subcontinent. Conversely, it may be noticed that no such shops are run by black people. This is also the case in parts of cities which are predominantly black. Even in those districts, it is Indians who own and run small shops. This is curious, and a personal anecdote relating to a family that I know might shed light on how this situation arose, at least in some cases. In August 1972, the leader of the African country of Uganda, Idi Amin, ordered the expulsion of around 80,000 people of Indian origin who were living in the country. This order was made on the grounds that the Indians, mostly Gujarati Hindus, were disloyal and engaged in dubious commercial practices. Many were running small businesses. Those who left Uganda were penniless, the government having seized all their assets before deporting them. Over 27,000 of the refugees came to Britain. Among them was a young man who was just 17 years of age. This boy, for he was scarcely more than that, decided he wanted to run a business of his own. For the first few years after arriving in Britain, the young Ugandan Asian worked ferociously hard in factories and any other jobs in order to raise money to buy the lease of a small shop. He worked almost every waking hour to achieve this end. The shop was a newsagent's in North London. He married, and he and his wife devoted their lives to the shop. It meant being ready at 5 a.m. to take delivery of the morning newspapers and then staying open later than any other local shop in order to attract customers. Then, after they closed at night, there was paperwork to be done, tax returns to fill in, VAT to deal with. They had 2 sons over the next few years. By the time that the boys were of school age, the couple managed by the most stringent economies. They didn't go anywhere or spend any money on anything unnecessary. They had enough to send them to an independent fee-paying school. They didn't have time to go out anywhere, nothing else on which to spend the money. 40 years later, one of these boys is a consultant at a well-known London hospital and the other is a successful solicitor. In a single generation, the family has leapt from a man who was a poorly educated factory worker to middle-class prosperity for his children. Many similar stories could be told about those of Asian heritage who left an African country with literally nothing, but very few such tales can be told about black Africans who also came to Britain with nothing. This is also the case with the majority of immigrants and their families from the Caribbean. It is this which explains why 46% of people in Britain from Indian families are in the top bracket for income, but fewer than half as many black people. None of this will come to much of a surprise to anybody I'm talking to on this channel. Those in the United States may have noticed something similar with convenience stores run by those of East Asian origin. It's all well known to the British and American governments, of course. Instead of thinking hard about the reason for the gap in incomes and standard of living between those whose roots are in Asia and those whose families are from Africa and the Caribbean, the aim of most policies which aim to address this discrepancy in prosperity is simply to rig the figures, so making it look as though things are improving and black people are drawing level with everybody else. The communist way of doing this is by announcing measures to ensure that this or that workforce will reflect the community which it serves. This is code for fixing the deck, a strategy which in the United States goes by the name of racial balancing. The thinking behind the scheme is that since black people are apparently unable to get into good jobs or move up the ladder of promotion by their own efforts, whether due to institutional racism or some other reason, they'll need to be given special treatment. This will reduce poverty among those in this particular community, because eventually the same proportion of black people will have lucrative jobs as white people or those of Asian heritage. In Britain, Lloyds Bank announced a couple of years ago that they were worried about the lack of diversity in their senior management. It had been noticed only 0.6% of senior management were black, whereas 3% of the British population were black. There was obviously a clear and pressing need for some racial balancing. The bank said that by 2024 they intended to ensure that 3% of their senior management would be black. There was no suggestion that capable black employees had been held back in their promotion, nor that the company was discriminating against black job applicants. Neither did racial prejudice appear to be operating to prevent minorities becoming part of the senior management. 7.3% of senior management were either black or minority ethnic, chiefly of Indian origin. There is, of course, only one way that the number of black people in senior management could be increased fivefold at Lloyds Bank, and that would be by promoting black staff in preference to those of other ethnicities who might be better qualified to do the job. If those black people were already able enough to join the senior management, then they would presumably have been promoted before, and so it's a reasonable guess that they're not actually that capable. The other way to fill this quota would be to advertise externally, then rig the selection process against people of Indian or Chinese origin and give preference to those applicants whose family originally came from Africa. There's something very peculiar going on at the moment when it comes to black people in Britain and America. They are always being singled out as being uniquely deserving of our compassion and help because of the raw deal which they've had in the past. Often slavery and colonialism are wheeled out as though they can shed light on the matter. I think that over the next few days I will talk a little about the real reasons for black poverty and black underachievement, and those reasons have absolutely nothing to do with systemic racism.